Audiobook Academy. Book Summary. Little Women. By Louisa May Alcott. Louisa May Alcott's Little Women was released in 2 volumes in 1868 and 1869. It was a request from her friends and family to write a book for young girls that prompted Alcott to write the book. Immediately following the publication of the first novel, Alcott received a flood of requests for the second one. She whipped up the next volume in record time to make room for them. In 1880, the 2 volumes were merged into a single novel, Little Women, and published. The novel has remained a popular read for decades, and the strong female characters in it helped to inspire the growth of feminism in the United States in the 20th century. It tells the journey of the 4 March sisters as they mature into young women and young women into young women. With the support of their parents, the girls must learn how to be good ladies and how to be individuals. The tale spans several years in their lives, and at the end, they are all happily married mothers with children of their own. On Christmas Eve, Little Women begins. The March family's 4 girls have gathered in their modest living room. Christmas presents are out of the question because their mother thinks it is a waste of money during wartime. There are no gifts for each other, so the sisters come up with the notion of using their $1 to buy something for Mommy. Meg, the oldest and most attractive of the trio, is 16 years old. Joe, the second youngest, is 15 years old and a bit of a tomboy who gets easily enraged. Beth, a 13-year-old girl, completes the group. Amy, a 12-year-old musician, completes the group. Mr. March, the girl's father, was declared ineligible to serve in the Union Army because of his age. Instead, he became a chaplain and is currently deployed. While he's away, the daughters in the March family gather around their mother to hear his latest letter. When their father returns, he hopes to be even more in love and proud of my daughters than ever before. It is decided that the girls will play a game in which they each endeavor to develop one aspect of their personality. Meg resolved to be less self-conscious, Joe decided to be more feminine, Beth decided to be less bashful, and Amy decided to be less selfish. All etiquette guides will be provided by their mother. Guidebooks were waiting for them when they got out of bed the next morning. As a surprise, the girls present their mother with gifts they've purchased for her. It's time for the family's friends to see a play that Joe has written and the girls are performing in. In spite of a few minor setbacks, everyone had a great time at the Christmas dinner following the play. Mr. Lawrence, the neighboring affluent benefactor, has given the family a lavish dinner. On New Year's Eve, Meg and Joe go out to a party nearby. Her best dress has a burn mark on it and her gloves have been stained with lemonade, so Joe is concerned about how she would be seen as ladylike. Joe meets Theodore Lawrence, the nephew of her neighbor, at the party. He tells her to name him Laurie, and the two of them get along since they have a love for playing male games. It's time for the females to get back to work after New Year's. In the past, Mr. March had more money, and Meg remembers that time before he lost his property, which makes her angry. The King family hires Meg as their governess. Great-aunt March hires Joe to assist her as a nanny. The March maid, Hannah, relies on Beth to help around the house. Amy is a regular student who is well liked by her fellow students. Joe resolves to get to know Laurie one day. Using the snowball as a distraction, she discovers that he has a head cold and can't stand being stuck in bed all day. After inviting her in, he receives gifts from the other sisters, as well. Laurie becomes less shy after playing with Beth's kitties. Joe decides to wait for Laurie while he visits the doctor after Laurie shows her his grandfather's impressive collection. While browsing the library, Mr. Lawrence and Joe happen to meet and decide to have tea. Joe brings up the fact that she believes Laurie is lonely and in need of more company. In agreement with Mr. Lawrence, Laurie should spend more time with the March family. Laurie makes a triumphant return to entertain Joe and his grandfather on the piano. This clearly annoys Mr. Lawrence, and when Joe returns home, she finds out that his son married an Italian musician despite Mr. Lawrence's objections. Laurie was raised by Mr. Lawrence after the death of her parents. For some reason his son, Laurie, brings up memories of him as a musician, which brings about an emotional response in him from time to time. Everyone except Beth, who is terrified of the austere Mr. Lawrence, likes the March family's regular visits to the Lawrence house. As a result of hearing this, Mr. Lawrence offers to let her play his piano for him so that it will remain in tune. Beth is on board and has made it a regular ritual to practice the piano. She has always wanted to perform on such a high-end piano. Beth makes Mr. Lawrence a pair of slippers to demonstrate her appreciation, and Mr. Lawrence decides to give her the old piano that his granddaughter used to play as a thank you. Mr. Lawrence becomes a friend of Beth's following this. Amy buys a jar of pickled limes to share with her classmates at school, which is against school policy. After swatting her hand and making her stand in front of the class till lunch, her teacher decides to discipline her. Amy is humiliated by this event because she has never been punished in this manner before. She decides to leave school and travel home on her own. Amy is scolded by Mommy for her behavior, yet she is nonetheless expelled from school. Amy burns a manuscript book that Joe had been writing in as retaliation for not being permitted to attend to the theater with Laurie, Meg, and Joe. Amy's ears are boxed by Joe in a fit of rage. She knows she was wrong, but Joe isn't ready to accept it. The following day, Laurie, Joe, and Amy all go ice skating together. Amy slips through the ice because Joe refuses to inform her which ice is safe to skate on. Fortunately, Laurie and Joe are able to intervene and save her. Joe confesses to her mother that she nearly killed Amy because she was so enraged at her. Even as a child, Mommy admits that she had a bad temper, but learned to control it later in life. As a result, Joe pledges to not let her rage get the best of her again. Meg visits Annie Moffat, a well-to-do girl, for a 2-week stay in the spring of her senior year. In spite of her disappointment at not being able to bring anything more special, Meg tries to remain positive and appreciate the experience. Meg overhears a rumor that her mother wants her to marry Laurie because of his money at a party at the Moffats. Meg's friends are chattering about her more than the concept that her mother wants her to marry Laurie. That night, she cries, and the next day, her pals are more understanding of her. It's only because they now believe she could be Laurie's wife that Meg recognizes this. Meg enjoys this. Meg is offered the use of Belle's outfit for the next occasion by yet another young lady. Meg agrees, and she finds that individuals in the upper echelons of society are more hospitable and attentive to her when she is well dressed. Laurie, who is also present at the gathering, expresses his displeasure with Meg's demeanor. Meg acknowledges that she is bothered by the attention she is receiving and the expectations she is placed under. The strange events at the Moffats are brought up by Meg when she returns home. However, Meg is adamant that Mommy was wrong to send her and that she is grateful for the experience since it taught her something. It is important for Mommy to make it clear to her children that she does not want them to marry well-off men, but rather that they become excellent women who are able to find loving partners. She has faith that good men will not be turned away because of their financial situation. Meg and Joe will have 3 months free from work the next summer while their employers are away. They've decided to spend the summer relaxing and having fun instead of working. Mommy decides to let them have a free week, but she warns that they will miss having a job to counteract the fun they are having. After a while, the females realize that she is right and that they are bored. Her pet parrot, Pip, died after she forgot to feed him all week. A short memorial service is held for him by the women. Asked if they had enjoyed themselves, Mommy inquires about their thoughts. That inactivity had grown tiresome and that when they resumed work, they had a lot to catch up on. Mommy explains that having a job gives them a sense of purpose and autonomy. Tells them it's crucial to strike a good work-life balance. Meg receives a poem and a glove from Mr. Brooke, Laurie's tutor, one day during that summer. Mommy wonders what Meg's relationship with him is all about. Ned Moffat, on the other hand, has a crush on Meg. Meg doesn't flirt with him since she doesn't want to stir up more rumors, but he makes it obvious what he wants. Laurie joins the girls for a picnic. The young women express their hopes and dreams for the future. Joe aspires to be an author, Amy to travel to Rome and pursue her artistic career, and Beth merely wants to spend her time at home. It is Laurie's fear that he may be forced into the family company, which he does not want to do, by his grandfather. As a child, Meg instructs him to be obedient to his grandfather, but Joe pushes him to follow his heart. Laurie makes the decision that evening to stay with his grandfather and give up on his dream of becoming a musician. A chance encounter between Laurie and Joe takes place in town, and Joe admits that she has been to the newspaper twice and left 2 stories there. For now, she's keeping her fingers crossed. A glove belonging to Meg was retained by Mr. Brooke, Laurie reveals. As far as Joe is concerned, Meg is maturing more faster than she is. Read to the family soon after, Joe's story is published in the local newspaper. During the fall of that year, Mr. March falls ill, and Mommy must accompany him to Washington, D.C. As an escort, Mr. Brooke readily agrees. Thank you very much, Meg. Joe makes a shopping trip and comes home with a total of $25. She confesses to the barber that she sold her hair to assist support her father's medical bills. Mommy leaves the girls with Hannah and Mr. Lawrence, who will be responsible for their safety. In his letters from Washington, Mr. Brooke reports that his father's health has improved and then goes on to write every day about the latest developments in his condition. The girls feel relieved and focus their efforts on their tasks in order to avoid worrying. Beth offers her assistance to a family who has a sick infant. Scarlet fever takes the baby's life within hours. When Beth's doctor tells her to avoid becoming sick, she takes belladonna at his advice. Amy, on the other hand, is quarantined for a brief time with Aunt March in the hopes that she would not have scarlet fever. As Beth's condition worsens, Jo begins to care for her. When Hannah tells the girls not to write their parents about Beth's condition, she fears that it will simply cause them more stress. Mrs. March, on the other hand, is summoned as Beth's condition worsens. Laurie confesses to Jo that the day before, he had defied Hannah's request and called Mrs. March. Jo bursts into tears of relief and hugs and loves Laurie. She apologizes profusely before hurriedly apologizing once again and saying her goodbyes. Just in time for Mrs. March's arrival, Beth begins to feel better. Upon returning home, Mommy reveals to Jo that Mr. Brooke told her he hopes to secure a good lifestyle and then ask Meg for her hand in marriage. Meg's affections for Mr. Brooke are the focus of Mommy's investigation. She soon concludes that her daughter does not yet love John, but that she will in the future. In order to find out what Jo is hiding, Laurie devises a strategy to track down Meg and Brooke. He writes a love letter to Meg, signing it John Brooke, in which he declares his undying devotion to her. To Mr. Brooke, Meg informs him that she is too young to get married, and that she has to talk to her parents. As a result, John denies ever receiving the letter and claims to have no idea about it. Jo understands that Laurie penned the letter and apologizes to Meg on Laurie's behalf. The truth about Mr. Brooke and Mrs. March's relationship is revealed to Meg. Meg is still hesitant to have a romantic relationship since she believes she is too young to be married. Mr. Brooke, she claims, is the only person she wants to be friends with. On Christmas Eve, Mr. March makes his way to his daughter's house, to their joy. In the time since he last saw his daughters, Mr. March notes that they've grown significantly. Meg's beautiful, silky hands are now rough and hardened from work, Jo has become more ladylike, Beth has become less bashful, and Amy has become more patient and less conceited as a result of their time together. Meg still has an issue to deal with, in the form of Mr. Brooke's proposal, despite her father's return. He asks Meg if she worries about Mr. Brooke one day when he stops by to see Mr. March on his way home from work. Meg's response is that she has no idea. Aunt March enters the room and sees the two of them engaged in a tense conversation. Aunt March warns Meg that if she accepts Mr. Brooke's proposal, she would never give them a penny again. Meg is enraged by this, and she declares that she will marry anybody she chooses instead. She stands up for John, stating that he is compassionate, brave, and dedicated. Aunt March storms out in a huff, and John returns to the room, having overheard Meg defend John. His question is repeated, and Meg, instead of rehearsing the speech she had already practiced, agrees. Once again, Jo returns to see Meg and John seated together, which upsets her. Jo tells her parents about the problem and tells them to take care of it so she may cry alone in her room. Once again, Jo returns to see Meg and John seated together, which upsets her. Jo tells her parents and sends them to deal with the matter so that she can stay in her room and weep. He convinces the March family that Meg is old enough to be engaged, and they agree to wait for 3 years with the hope that he would be settled and financially secure by that point. Part 2 picks up 3 years later. Mr. March is now able to spend his time at home full-time after the war finished. In the community, he serves as a minister. The second part begins 3 years later. There was an end to the conflict, and now Mr. March is back at home full-time. In the community, he serves as a minister. Wounded and honorably discharged from service in World War II, John Brooke now works as a bookkeeper. Meg has fallen head over heels in love with him and is getting ready to tie the knot with him soon. Dovecote, the couple's modest but well-appointed new home, will be built with the help of their loved ones and friends. While Jo is writing, Beth is still recovering from scarlet fever and is unable to walk on her own. Amy is now employed as Aunt March's personal assistant. Laurie's grandfather is paying for his college education. Meg and John get married in a small, family-oriented wedding. For his grandson, Mr. Lawrence wishes him luck in finding the right woman for him, and wants to see him marry someone in the month of March. Even though Laurie is reluctant to commit, he promises to give it his all. Jo keeps submitting stories to the newspaper in the hopes of one day becoming a paid author. Margaret and John are Meg's firstborn children, who she affectionately refers to as Daisy and Demi. Soon after, Amy receives an invitation from Carol, the girl's aunt, to travel to Europe. Jo is wounded and angry that she wasn't asked instead, but she stands by her sister and assists her with the packing. Laurie accepts Amy's request to look after the family while she is away. While in Europe, she runs into Fred Vaughn, a former classmate of Laurie's. Her relationship with him progresses to the point where she agrees to accept his proposal if he asks for it. Jo realizes that her sister, Beth, is depressed and suspects that she is in love with Laurie. She decides to make Laurie fall in love with Beth, despite the fact that Laurie is already in love with Jo. For years, Laurie has tried to bring up the subject of courtship with Beth, but she has consistently ignored or denied him. She mentions Beth in passing to Laurie, but never by name. Laurie interprets this as a hint that Jo will be ready to marry him once he graduates from college, believing that she is referring to herself. To make Laurie forget about her and have Beth notice her, Jo decides to teach at a New York boarding home for the winter. Mr. Bear, an elderly German tutor, begins working with Jo to help her learn the language. They end up being good buddies. Her stories continue to be accepted by New York publications. Because of this, she must write stories that are darker in tone and less moral in order to appease the city editors. She publishes them under a pseudonym and keeps their authorship a secret from those back home. That she is composing the stories makes Mr. Bear very unhappy with her. Jo stops writing for the remainder of her time in New York because she is ashamed of the things she has written. That she is composing the stories makes Mr. Bear very unhappy with her. Jo decides to cease writing for the rest of her stay in New York since she is ashamed of the story she has written. Laurie will be a college graduate when Jo gets home. He proposes to her on the day she returns from her vacation. To make things right, Jo apologizes and confesses that she has tried to love him as he loves her but has not been successful. When Laurie's heart is broken, she tries to persuade her that their match is still fine. Jo thinks that they are both too temperamental to get married. In an effort to vent her frustration, Laurie storms out of the house. Mr. Lawrence is the first person Jo tells when she becomes concerned about him and tells him what has transpired. When Mr. Lawrence thinks he has had enough of Jo, he chooses to take Laurie to Europe for a few months. When it comes down to it, Laurie is down to go. As a result of her actions, Jo fears that her best friend will return a different person. Her secret earlier in the year was not about being in love with Laurie, but rather about her own mortality. As Beth reveals, she's known she was deteriorating for some time and has come to terms with that fact. She simply wants to take it easy and savor the moments she has left. In France, Laurie and Amy finally get to spend some time together. These two have come to terms with the fact that they have changed a great deal and that they may harbor romantic sentiments for one another. Since the birth of their twins, Meg and her husband have noticed that they are spending less time together. Mommy pushes her to involve John more in the upbringing of the children and to take a more active role in global problems, which have an impact on both men and women. Amy and Laurie talk about Fred Vaughn when they are in France. Fred does not fit Laurie's vision of Amy's future husband, so she's surprised that she's considering marriage. Amy expresses her desire for Jo to be present while the two dispute over this point. Amy deduces from Laurie's expression that Jo must have declined him, which explains why he has been acting strangely since hearing the name of her sister. Amy offers her condolences and advises him that if he wants Jo to like him, he must do something about it. As a result of her advice, he departs for the United States and returns to live with his grandfather. Beth's final months are spent being nursed by Jo. Beth assures Jo that she will always be by her side and pledges to look after their aging parents. A year after Jo's agreement to the plan, Beth dies peacefully. Laurie decides to pursue a career in music by moving to Vienna. He quickly learns, though, that it's more difficult than he anticipated. He comes to terms with the fact that his talent as a musician does not qualify him as a genius, and he makes the decision to give it up. His love feelings for Jo begin to fade throughout this time, and he merely has a brotherly affection for her now. Just when Amy thinks she has made up her mind about accepting Fred Vaughn, he returns to France. He proposes to her and she turns him down. The news that Beth has passed away comes as a shock to Amy. Soon after, Laurie shows up, and the two realize they are in love even though they don't say so out loud. Amy accepts Laurie's proposal soon after. Newspapers hail Jo's newfound literary prowess. She has finally arrived at the point where she can say that she is writing what she wants to be writing and that others are responding positively to her work. Jo receives a letter informing her of Laurie and Amy's engagement, and she is overjoyed. In spite of this, though, she wishes she could find true happiness. When Laurie and Amy get back from their European vacation, they announce that they had already wed. Laurie asks Jo if they can go back to being best friends, and she enthusiastically accepts her offer. Mr. Bear shows up unexpectedly one day, and Joe is astonished. When she brings him home to meet the rest of the family, they are all instantly warm to him. Soon after, Mr. Bear and Joe come to terms with their feelings for one another, and he tells her he is leaving for the West to look for a job and a place to call his own. To Joe, the prospect of marrying him excites her. Aunt March passes away in the final chapter of the story, leaving her estate to Joe. As soon as Joe and Mr. Bear tie the knot, they purchase the estate with the goal of turning it into a boarding school for orphaned boys. With 2 sons on the way, Joe is thrilled to be surrounded by tiny boys and can't wait to be a mother to them as well. On the eve of Mrs. March's 60th birthday, 5 years later, the extended March family meets at the estate. On a nightly basis, the sisters gather to reminisce about their hopes and dreams as young women and the divergent paths their lives ultimately took. Meg may not have the opulent things she desired, but she is content. Joe plans to continue her writing career, and Amy is overjoyed with the birth of her own daughter, whom she has named Beth. They're all in agreement that they're grateful and content. Joe March, the lead character of the book. In the beginning of the tale, Joe is a tomboy who is fast to get angry, but she eventually learns to control her rage. She's also a big fan of the written word. A lot of the inspiration for Joe came from Louisa May Alcott herself. As long as Laurie keeps making marriage proposals, Joe expects that they will eventually get married. In the end, Joe is married to Professor Bear and discovers her love for teaching. For a young lady of the 19th century, Joe demonstrates both good and terrible tendencies, making her a highly interesting main character. Joe's flaws, on the other hand, help to humanize and endear her. Meg March, the eldest March sister. Meg is a beautiful, naive, and delicate character at the beginning of the tale. She has a hard time letting go of her affluent tastes and marries a poor man out of pure passion for him. Meg Finest exemplifies the archetype of the good, kind character popular in 19th century literature. When she allows herself to be made over at Annie Moffat's house, she strives to transform herself to make others happy. Later, she transforms into a well-behaved housewife who shuns all things opulent while seeming to be interested in her husband's interests. Beth March, the third March sister. Beth is a quiet, reserved young lady at the beginning of the novel. She despises the amount of labor it takes to maintain the house in order. Beth and Joe have the trait of being introverted, which makes them close friends. Beth is a more traditional heroine for the era. Alcott was putting an end to the age of modern literature's angelic heroines when she killed her off. Amy March, the youngest of the March sisters. A gifted singer and artist, Amy has an uncanny ability to influence others without them even realizing she's doing it. Despite her inability to comprehend the words she is speaking or the actions she is taking, Amy attempts to act like a proper woman as a teenager. A successful career and a luxurious lifestyle await her at the end of it all. Like Joe, she is an artist who has difficulty balancing the standards of society with her own desires. Despite this, Joe serves as a counterpoint to Amy since she comes out as more kind and genuine. The imperfections of both characters, on the other hand, bring them to life. Laurie Lawrence, neighbor to the Marches, best friend to Joe and eventual husband to Amy. When Laurie's grandfather wants him to take over the family business, he has a hard time telling him no because he wants to be a musician. This is where he connects with Joe, because she is going through a similar process of coming into her own as a lady. As Little Woman was published, Alcott got several messages from readers requesting that she marry Joe and Laurie at the conclusion. Because of some reason, she decided to go against this in a sly manner and have Laurie marry Amy. Louisa May Alcott was born on November 29, 1832, the same day her father turned 33, and she went on to become an acclaimed author, feminist, and abolitionist. To help maintain Louisa's family of daughters, her father frequently had financial difficulties, and thus the women of the household had to work as well. As well as teaching and sewing, Louisa and her sisters also served in several other roles around the house such as governess and housewife. The Transcendental Club belonged to Amos Branson Alcott, Louisa's father. Eventually, he wanted to establish a school for children based on his transcendentalist ideals. Transcendentalists had a strong belief in and constant pursuit of perfection. Nature-based thinkers believe individuals can best advance by rethinking and discarding their preconceptions and embracing new ideas. Corruption permeated society and its institutions. Teaching self-reliance and independence is what they did for them. However, Louisa's wildness continued to enrage her father on a regular basis. It was impossible for Louisa to avoid becoming a writer because of the influence of her father, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, and Margaret Fuller, on her schooling. However, her aptitude for writing children's novels was a complete surprise. Little Women, Good Wives, and Jo's Boys were among Louisa May Alcott's most popular works of literature. Anna, Elizabeth, and Abigail May were her three sisters and the inspiration for the stories. When she was 17, she penned Flower Fables, a gift for Ralph Waldo Emerson's daughter Ellen, her first book. There was a time when Louisa published stories under the pseudonym A.M. Barnard, full of angst and excitement. Although written with children in mind, these works were not as well received as the author's work for younger readers. Louisa was a journalist for the Atlantic Monthly when the American Civil War broke out. It was during World War II that Louisa tried her hand at being a nurse. After 6 weeks of treatment at the Union Hospital in Georgetown, D.C., she was discharged due to a typhoid outbreak. During her recovery, she was able to pen a few letters to her family, which were later collected and published as hospital sketches. They demonstrated the coldness and callousness of the surgeons she encountered in hospitals. She defined her spinsterhood as having the male spirit stuck in a female body because she had never been married. She had, however, experienced love before. Ladislas Wisniewski, a young Polish man, was her love interest when she was in Europe. In Little Women, she drew inspiration for her character Laurie from him. Before she died, she threw out everything she had written about him, so it appears that their relationship didn't work out. However, despite never having children of her own, she did raise her sister's daughter when she passed away from a condition known as childbed fever after her sister Abigail May. Louisa cared for Lulu until her death in 1888, when she was just a year old. Louisa May Alcott, the author of Little Women, passed away on March 6, 1888, from complications from a stroke. She was 55 years old. Since contracting typhoid during the Civil War, her health has been deteriorating. She is interred in Concord, Massachusetts' Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. Emerson, Hawthorne, and Thoreau's graves are all within walking distance of her. Author's Ridge is the name given to the location. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button for more content like this. See you in next video.